You've returned to Horror Drift Stories. If you'd like, leave a comment telling me your city or country. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Dim the lights, and let's begin. Story 1. I am typing this on my phone while sitting on the cold floor of my kitchen. My back is pressed against the refrigerator, and the dim light from the screen is the only thing keeping the room from feeling completely black. I have turned the brightness down as low as possible because my eyes hurt when the light is too strong. My head feels like it is full of pressure, like something is squeezing it from the inside. I need to explain everything that has happened during the last 3 weeks. I have to start from the beginning so that someone reading this might understand the strange situation I am trapped in right now. I desperately need someone to tell me how to stop a person from walking into a building when I cannot use my voice to warn them. Everything began about a month ago when my relationship ended. The breakup was worse than anything I had expected. It was the kind of emotional collapse that leaves your body completely drained. I could barely eat or sleep, and simple daily tasks felt impossible. For 4 years, we had lived together in a bright apartment near the center of the city. The neighborhood was always busy. There were people everywhere, restaurants on every corner, and friends visiting constantly. When the relationship finally fell apart, I had to pack everything I owned into cardboard boxes during one long and painful weekend. I remember standing in the empty apartment after the last box was sealed, feeling like my entire life had been erased. I didn't want to stay anywhere that reminded me of the past. I wanted to disappear somewhere quiet, somewhere nobody knew me. I needed a place where the rent was cheap enough that I could survive on a single income, and where the environment was silent enough for me to think. More than anything, I wanted isolation. I believed that being alone would help me deal with the grief. For several days, I searched through online rental listings. I skipped past anything modern or anything located in busy neighborhoods. Eventually, I found a listing for a small one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a very old brick building at the industrial edge of the city. The area looked quiet and empty in the photos. The rent was suspiciously low, far below the usual market price. But the apartment itself looked clean. It had hardwood floors and tall ceilings. I scheduled a viewing immediately. The building owner met me outside the entrance. He was an older man with tired eyes and a heavy ring of brass keys hanging from his belt. He did not seem interested in asking me any questions about myself. Instead, he looked like he wanted to finish the viewing as quickly as possible and move on with his day. We climbed a narrow staircase to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled strongly of dust and old cleaning chemicals. The carpet was faded and worn, but thick enough to soften the sound of footsteps. At the very end of the hallway, there were only 2 doors. My apartment was on the left. The door on the right belonged to another unit. A small brass number plate was attached to it, darkened with age. I asked the owner about the neighbors. I told him that I worked from home sometimes, and that I was going through a difficult personal situation. I explained that I needed a quiet environment above everything else. He waved one hand toward the door on the right, and told me not to worry. According to him, that entire side of the floor was empty. The previous tenant had moved out months earlier. Management was delaying renovation of the apartment until the following year because of budget problems. He promised that I would basically have the end of the hallway to myself. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. I signed the lease that same afternoon and handed him the deposit. The next morning, I started carrying my boxes upstairs. The first few days in the apartment were completely normal. I unpacked slowly, arranged my books on the shelves, and tried to get used to living alone again. The space was a little dark and drafty, but the quiet was exactly what I needed. During the second week, however, I started noticing sounds coming through the wall in my bedroom. The wall that separates my apartment from the neighboring unit runs along the entire length of my bedroom and part of the kitchen. The paint is old and peeling, and the baseboards have small gaps where the wood has warped over the years. I placed my bed directly against that wall because it seemed like the most stable position in the room. One Tuesday night, I was lying awake in bed when I heard a heavy footstep from the other side of the wall. At first, I thought I imagined it. Then I heard another step, and another. Someone was pacing slowly across a hardwood floor. The sound was deep and dull, like heavy shoes hitting the boards. The vibrations traveled through the wall and into the frame of my bed. I was annoyed, but not worried. I assumed the owner had simply lied about the apartment being empty. Maybe he had rented it to someone else without telling me. The pacing continued for almost 20 minutes before stopping suddenly. A few seconds later, I heard a rough cough. It was clearly human. The walls between the apartments were obviously thinner than I had expected. Over the next few days, the sounds became more frequent. Sometimes, the pacing happened late at night. Other times, it happened early in the morning. I started hearing objects being dropped, chairs scraping across the floor, and cabinet doors opening and closing. The constant noise slowly began to wear down my patience. I had chosen this apartment specifically because it was supposed to be quiet. Listening to a stranger walk around just a few inches away from my head was driving me insane. Finally, on Friday afternoon, I called the building owner. When he answered, I immediately started complaining about the noise coming from the apartment next door. I told him that the tenant was being extremely disruptive and asked if he could speak with them about it. The owner sounded confused. He paused for several seconds before replying. Then he insisted, very firmly, that the apartment next door was empty. He said he was the only person with a key and that no one had entered that unit for at least 6 months. I argued with him. I described the footsteps, the coughing, and the sounds of furniture moving. I suggested that maybe a squatter had broken in. He sighed and told me that old buildings often carry sound in strange ways. According to him, noises can travel through pipes, ventilation shafts, and structural beams. He believed the sounds were actually coming from tenants on the 5th floor above the empty apartment. The vacant unit was probably acting like an echo chamber, making the sounds louder and pushing them through the wall. His explanation sounded reasonable enough that I began doubting myself. Old buildings do strange things. Eventually, I apologized for complaining and ended the call. That evening, I walked to the pharmacy on the corner and bought a large box of foam earplugs. From that point on, I wore the earplugs almost every night. They worked perfectly. Once the foam expanded inside my ears, the footsteps and coughing disappeared. My apartment felt peaceful again. For an entire week, I lived inside that quiet bubble without realizing that something very wrong was happening. Everything changed 2 days ago. I woke up early on Sunday morning and went into the kitchen to make coffee. I was still half asleep and thinking about a dream I had just had. When I reached into the cabinet to grab my favorite ceramic mug, my fingers slipped. The mug fell. I watched it drop toward the floor and prepared myself for the loud crash that always comes when something heavy breaks. The mug hit the linoleum and shattered into pieces, but there was no sound. Not even the smallest noise. I stood there staring at the broken pieces around my feet. I had clearly seen the mug break apart, but my ears heard absolutely nothing. It was like the event happened inside a vacuum. I rubbed my ears, thinking they might still be blocked from the earplugs. I swallowed, trying to equalize the pressure. Then I started counting. 10 seconds passed, and suddenly The loud crash of the mug echoed through the wall from the apartment next door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The exact sound of my mug breaking was coming from the supposedly empty unit. I decided to test it. I grabbed a heavy dictionary from the shelf and dropped it onto the floor. Again, there was no sound. 10 seconds later, the thud came through the wall. I tested more things. I hit a spoon against the counter. I slammed the bathroom door. Every single sound disappeared when it happened, in my apartment, and then reappeared 10 seconds later in the empty unit. By the end of the day, I was terrified to move. As the hours passed, the silence around me grew deeper. The hum of the refrigerator vanished. The faint sound of traffic outside disappeared. By nightfall, the only thing I could hear was my breathing and my heartbeat. Yesterday morning, something even worse happened. I accidentally kicked the leg of a heavy table. The pain was sharp and immediate. Instinctively, I opened my mouth and screamed. But no sound came out. I tried again, forcing air from my lungs. Nothing. 10 seconds later, my scream came through the wall. It was my voice, the exact same voice. When I tried to say the word help, the word appeared 10 seconds later from the empty apartment. That was when I realized something inside that unit was taking my sounds. Later, I stepped into the hallway and knocked on the neighbor's door. My knocking made no sound. 10 seconds later, the pounding came from inside the apartment. Then the deadbolt clicked, and a voice spoke from the other side. The voice was mine. It told me to go back to my apartment. It said I would be seen when I was ripe. I ran back inside and locked my door. Now I am sitting here on the kitchen floor, typing this message while listening through the wall. The thing in the other apartment has just called my ex-partner using my stolen voice. It told her to come here because I was in danger. She lives 20 minutes away. If she reaches the building, she will walk straight to that door, and I cannot make a sound to warn her. The pacing has started again on the other side of the wall. It is moving toward the door. Either it is preparing to welcome her inside, or it is waiting for me to step into the hallway. Story 2. This morning started with someone whispering urgently outside my window. We're calling everyone to the square. Hurry, and try not to make noise. I answered from inside, still half asleep. What is it this time? Another meeting about irrigation? No. The voice replied quietly. Something more serious. Some neighbors have been spotted near the eastern fields, close to the cemetery. The second voice in that exchange was mine. I'm not proud of the tone I used. It sounded like I didn't care. The truth is that after 8 months in Millbrook Commons, you develop a certain resistance to emergencies. Every problem becomes a community discussion. Every small crisis turns into a meeting that lasts half the day. Last month we held an emergency gathering because 2 groups disagreed about the composting schedule. The month before that, a visiting collective from Vermont used the word tribe in a welcome speech, and we spent 6 hours discussing language and historical context. They're good people here, kind people, thoughtful people, but they are also exhausting. Still, they're my people now, for whatever that means. So when Jana grabbed my wrist that morning with a grip so tight it hurt, I almost made another joke. Then I saw her face. I didn't make the joke. By the time we reached the square, half the community was already there. Something felt wrong immediately. Millbrook Commons is never quiet. There is always noise. Someone working in a garden bed, someone practicing music, kids running around, people debating something with the energy of a public meeting. But this silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was heavy, thick. People were standing close together but pretending they weren't. No one wanted to acknowledge how crowded the square had become. Marcus stood near the front, staring east toward the fields. Marcus talks more than anyone else here. I once watched him speak for 40 minutes about the meaning of symbols on garden signs. Now, he wasn't speaking at all. That was when I realized something serious was happening. Paul climbed onto the water cistern so everyone could see him. The last bits of conversation stopped without him asking. It was strange how that worked. I've tried to explain Paul to people outside the community, but I always fail. He isn't tall, he isn't loud. The purple hair helps people remember him, but that's not really it either. It's more like the atmosphere changes when he steps into a space. Like opening a window in a room that was too warm. He was still wearing his work clothes. Dirt stained the knees of his pants. Someone had clearly pulled him straight out of the garden beds. That made him seem even more serious somehow. He looked around at all of us quietly for a moment before speaking. 300, he said calmly, approximately, moving slowly through the eastern tree line. The wind is blowing toward them, so they haven't caught our scent yet. We probably have 2 hours. A murmur spread through the square. Brian started talking about response strategies and defensive planning, but Paul glanced at him gently, and Brian stopped. I've been thinking, Paul continued, about what we've been doing wrong. Here is the part that still confuses me. I was standing there listening to a man calmly discuss philosophy while 300 undead bodies moved slowly toward our community. And somehow, when Paul spoke, I stopped being afraid. He talked for about 12 minutes. I've replayed the speech in my mind many times since then, trying to find the moment where someone should have interrupted him. But I can't find it. He talked about confrontation, about fear, about the way every strategy we used, fences, fire, loud noises, was based on the assumption that we were enemies. And when you treat something like an enemy, Paul said, it becomes one. He spoke about escalation, about cycles of hostility. We've never tried de-escalation, he said, not once. They're not attacking us, he continued. They're responding to a stimulus, something we produce again and again. He paused. We produce fear. No one said anything. Fear has a smell, Paul said softly. Fear has a sound. Marcus finally spoke. Paul nodded. I know. They ate the Hendersons. I know, Marcus. That sentence hung in the air. The Henderson family had lived here for years. Everyone in the community knew them. Their garden plots were still empty. Then what exactly are you suggesting? I heard myself ask. Paul raised his hand. He was holding a flower. Not a real one. It was made from folded paper. Later, Jana told me he had stayed up late in the supply room the night before making it. He used pages from the March newsletter about rainwater collection, the one nobody bothered to read. He folded the paper again and again until it formed delicate petals. It looked like a rose. It was strangely beautiful. A symbol, Paul said, raising it slightly so everyone could see. A dead symbol of life, he explained, so it won't offend them. I want to be honest here, because the strange thing is, part of me believed him. The part of me that had spent months living in a place where every problem was solved through conversation and patience. The part of me that had slowly started believing that conflict didn't have to be the first answer. That part of me thought he might be right. Paul stepped down from the cistern and walked through the crowd. No one tried to stop him. We parted automatically, forming a path. And then we followed him. Everyone, the entire community moved toward the eastern fence. Someone handed me a wooden crate so I could stand on it and see over the top. Beyond the fence stretched an open field. Beyond the field was the tree line, and standing just inside the trees was the horde. Hundreds of bodies, moving slowly forward. They walked in that terrible, unsteady way that the dead have. Their limbs swung loosely, their heads tilted at strange angles. 300 of them. Paul walked out into the field alone. The distance between him and the fence grew larger with every step. The wind pushed gently against his clothes. The paper flower turned slowly in his hand. And then something strange happened. The horde slowed down. I know how that sounds. But they did. The front row of bodies continued forward for a few steps, then hesitated, not stopping completely, just slowing, like something in the signal had changed. Paul kept walking. His shoulders were straight, his movements calm. He looked like someone approaching a friend rather than an enemy. The woman standing beside me grabbed my hand. I didn't pull away. Paul reached the middle of the field. He paused. Then he slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Before leaving the square, he had actually told us which knee he would use. The left one, he said. He wanted it to be symbolic. He knelt gracefully in the grass, his head bowed slightly, his arm extended forward. The paper flower held perfectly still, and the moment froze. The horde stood at the edge of the trees. Paul knelt in the grass. 300 people stood silently behind a wooden fence. He looked almost like a saint, still kneeling, still holding the flower. The woman next to me squeezed my hand tighter. Paul's shoulders moved slightly. He was speaking. We couldn't hear the words from that distance, but I knew Paul well enough to imagine them. He was apologizing for the fear we had shown, for the noise we had made, for centuries of misunderstanding between the living and the dead. And for a moment, just a moment, I believed it might work. The first one reached him before that thought finished forming. The paper flower disappeared first. Then the bodies surrounded him. The fence collapsed shortly after. After that, nothing was peaceful, nothing was symbolic, nothing was ceremonial. People often ask me now whether what Paul did was brave or foolish. They want a simple answer, something clean they can repeat to others. I tell them it was both, and neither. What I remember most isn't the screaming that followed. It isn't the broken fence. It isn't even the moment when the horde reached him. What stays with me is something much smaller. I was standing on a wooden crate, holding the hand of a woman I had never met before, and for a brief moment, I believed him. Story 3. Life feels meaningless right now. Death feels meaningless too. I used to believe there was something waiting for us after we died. Something peaceful. Something comforting. Now, I'm not sure there's anything out there at all. And if there is, I'm not sure it's something anyone would want to find. I think I'm moving too fast. I should explain things properly. My name is Wayne Strobel, and there is a rope hanging in my yard that leads to nowhere. Today is Saturday, March 6th. Earlier this morning, I buried my mother. Liver cancer finally took her after months of fighting. She held on longer than anyone expected. My mother was always stubborn like that, always strong. The funeral was difficult, not just emotionally, but physically too. I hadn't slept much for days. Standing there next to the grave, listening to the minister speak while the cold wind pushed through the cemetery, I felt like my body was running on nothing. Relatives I hadn't seen in years showed up. Aunts, uncles, cousins I barely remembered. Some of them hugged me. Some shook my hand. Most of them said the same thing over and over again. She's in a better place now. She's in heaven. She's probably laughing at all of us for crying. They meant well. I know they did. People say those things because they don't know what else to say. But now, after everything that happened tonight, the thought of where she might be scares me more than anything else. On the drive home from the funeral, I kept thinking about heaven. I imagined my mother opening her eyes somewhere bright and warm. I pictured my father waiting there for her. He died from a heart attack 8 years ago. I imagined him wrapping his arms around her and promising he'd never leave again. That thought was the only thing keeping me from driving my car straight into a tree. But when I walked into my house later that night, something strange happened. The first thing I did was open the refrigerator and start digging through it. I was looking for alcohol, something strong enough to quiet the noise in my head. I eventually grabbed a full case of beer and decided to sit outside on the back porch. My house is small, really small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in. But the one thing I love about it is the view. Behind the house, there's a clearing that stretches out to the edge of a forest. It's quiet back there, peaceful. Some nights I sit outside with a cigar and watch the stars. Sometimes I drink coffee while the sun rises over the trees. Tonight, I just wanted to get drunk and forget about everything. But when I opened the sliding door and stepped onto the porch, something was wrong. Normally, the clearing is full of life at night. Fireflies drift between the trees. Insects buzz and chirp. But tonight, it was completely silent. And there was a rope hanging in my yard. At first, I thought someone had tied it to one of the branches in the trees behind my house. But when I walked closer, I realized something impossible. The rope wasn't attached to anything. It simply extended upward into the sky until it disappeared into darkness. I stood there staring at it for a long moment before quietly saying, "What the hell?" The rope looked old, thick, maybe half an inch wide, dark brown like weathered leather. I set the case of beer down on the grass and reached out carefully. When I grabbed the rope, it felt real, solid, rough against my palms. I gave it a small tug, expecting it to fall. It didn't move, not even slightly. I stepped back and looked up again, trying to find where it was anchored, but the rope simply stretched upward into empty air, and for some reason, the sight of it made me angry. It wasn't supposed to exist. It didn't make sense. It felt like the universe itself was breaking its own rules right in front of me. I rolled up my sleeves and grabbed the rope again. This time I pulled harder. Still nothing. "You piece of shit," I muttered under my breath. "Why won't you move?" I wrapped the rope around my hands and pulled with everything I had. My feet dug into the dirt. My muscles strained. And finally, I felt it shift. Just a little. But that was enough to make me pull harder. "That's right," I growled through clenched teeth. "Move." Then suddenly, the rope slipped through my hands. I fell backward onto the grass and screamed as the skin on my palms tore open from the friction. Before I could even look at my hands, something else happened. The rope snapped back into place, and a massive sound exploded from the sky. It was like a giant bell ringing directly above my head. The sound was so loud I covered my ears and screamed. My hearing disappeared completely for several seconds, replaced by a high ringing tone. When my hearing slowly returned, I realized the bell was still echoing faintly above me. The rope was swaying gently back and forth. "What the hell is happening?" I shouted. Eventually the sound faded and the rope stopped moving. Only then did I look down at my hands. The skin on both palms had been stripped away where I held the rope. The wounds burned intensely. I started walking back toward the porch so I could clean them inside. But the moment I turned my back on the rope, something attacked my mind. Thousands of voices suddenly screamed inside my head. I dropped to my knees and grabbed my skull, trying to block out the noise. Every voice sounded different, but somehow they were all speaking the same message. They were speaking a language I didn't recognize, but somehow I understood them. "Who are you?" the voices cried. "Stop!" I screamed. "Please stop! Wayne Strobel, it hurts," I yelled. "Stop." Then suddenly the voices stopped. The silence was terrifying. "You rang the bell," they whispered. I spun around, looking for someone in the trees. But there was no one there. "You called us," the voices continued. "You made the sacrifice. Now what do you want? Who are you?" I shouted. "We are everything. We are nothing. We are life. We are death. We are angel. We are devil. We are what you summoned." "I didn't summon anything," I yelled. "You rang the bell." The voices sounded impatient now. "Ask your question. I don't understand. Would you like us to help you understand?" I nodded without thinking. The bell rang again. "You have suffered for us," the voices said. "So we will grant you knowledge. Ask your truth." One question had been sitting in my mind all day. I couldn't ignore it anymore. "Where are my parents?" I asked. Silence followed. Then the voices asked, "Are you willing to suffer for this truth?" "Yes." "Hold out your hand." I did, and suddenly pain exploded through my arm. My hand twisted and shriveled in front of my eyes. The skin turned black around the veins. Bone pushed through the knuckles. I screamed and fell to the ground. Then just as suddenly the pain stopped. The bell rang again. "You are Wayne Strobel," the voices said calmly, 43 years old. "Your father died from heart failure. Your mother died from cancer." "Stop," I said weakly. "I believe you." I forced myself to stand. "Where are they?" I asked. "Are they in heaven? Are they happy?" The voices paused again. "Are you willing to suffer for this truth?" they asked. "Yes," I shouted. The bell rang, and then I heard my mother screaming. "Help me!" Her voice came from somewhere beyond the rope. "Mom?" I cried. "Please help me," she screamed. "I don't want to be here." "Help!" "Dad?" I yelled. "Where are you?" I ran toward the trees, but couldn't find them. "They are part of us now," the voices said calmly. "They are suffering. Bring them back," I screamed. "Take me instead." "You received your truth," the voices replied. "Now give us your suffering." I threw the case of beer into the woods in rage. "Bring them back." The voices grew quiet. Then the beer cans flew back at impossible speed and exploded against the ground beside me. "Your suffering," the voices screamed. I ran inside the house, locked every door, closed every curtain. Now I'm sitting in my kitchen typing this as fast as I can. Something is moving in the trees outside. Tall, thin, pale. The rope has changed too. It no longer touches the ground. It hangs in the air now, and at the end of it, there's a noose. The bell is ringing again, and I think I finally understand what price they want from me. My mother's voice is still calling for help, but I know I can't save her. So now I keep wondering, was the truth worth it? Or are some truths better left buried with the dead? Story 4. The first time I saw her, I was in 2nd grade. My elementary school had too many students, and not enough space, so the cafeteria had been split into extra classrooms. Instead of eating in one big lunchroom, we stayed in our own rooms and ate at the little round tables where we usually did group work. That day, I was sitting with two of my friends, happily trading snacks and talking about what game we were going to play at recess. I had just opened a pack of peanut butter crackers and was about to take a bite when another kid rushed up to our table. "Are those peanut butter crackers?" he asked, sounding way too excited. I looked up at him and nodded. "Do you want to trade?" "I have starbursts." Even at that age, I knew that was a great deal for me. In my 7-year-old mind, starbursts were far better than crackers. It felt like I was getting away with something huge. I quickly handed him the packet, and he dropped 4 starbursts into my lunchbox. I remember grinning like I had just pulled off the smartest trade in history. He skipped back to his table while I unwrapped the pink starburst first, because that one was my favorite. I popped it into my mouth and started chewing. I had barely taken 2 bites when someone screamed. The whole room turned at once. At the table in the far corner, a group of kids had jumped to their feet and backed away from someone on the floor. It was the boy who had traded with me. He was lying there, twisting and kicking, his body moving in a way that looked wrong. His hands clawed at his throat. His face was turning red, then puffy, and tears were pouring down his cheeks. He looked terrified. The teacher rushed across the room and dropped to her knees beside him. "James," she shouted, pulling him up into her lap. "What happened? What did you eat?" James made a strangled sound and raised one shaking hand toward the table. The teacher leaned over and grabbed the packet of crackers. The moment she saw the label, all the color drained from her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. Then louder, in a voice full of panic, she cried, "He's allergic to peanuts." She scooped him up and ran from the room, yelling for the nurse. After that, everything went quiet. A few kids started crying. Some just stood there frozen. Nobody really understood what was happening. But we all knew something was very bad. A couple of minutes later, another teacher came in and told us to line up and come with him. He said we were going to his classroom for a little while. Everyone started moving, but I stayed near the back of the line. I couldn't stop staring at the table, at the half-empty packet of crackers, the packet I had handed James myself. At that age, I didn't understand how schools worked or what adults would do in a situation like that. I didn't know whether James was going to die or whether I was in trouble or whether both things could happen at the same time. All I knew was that something horrible had happened, and somehow I had caused it. I turned away from the table and looked toward the cubbies. My backpack was there. For a moment, I thought maybe I should hide, crawl behind the backpacks, and stay there until everyone forgot I existed. I took one step toward them. Then I stopped. Someone else was in the room. At first I noticed her hair. It was black, so black it almost looked wet, and it dragged lightly across the floor as she moved. Her skin was pale in a way I had never seen before, almost clear under the classroom lights. She wore a black suit, neat and formal, with a dark gray shirt under the jacket and a deep red tie. Her shoes were polished, and each step she took made a soft, measured tap against the floor. She was standing near the corner table. One of her pale hands reached down and picked up a cracker. Not the packet, just one cracker, one with a bite taken out of it. James's bite. In a panic, I ran over and grabbed at the leg of her pants. "I'm sorry," I cried. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe." My face pressed into the fabric of her pant leg, and I clung to it like she might be able to fix everything if I just apologized enough. For a long moment, she didn't react. She only stood there, staring at that bitten cracker in her hand. Her thumb slowly moved over the edge, where James had bitten it. She did not speak. Finally, after what felt like forever, she lowered the cracker, crouched down, and put both hands gently on my shoulders. I looked up. Then I jerked back in horror. She had no mouth, no nose. Her face was smooth, except for her eyes, and even those were wrong. They weren't normal eyes with whites and irises and pupils. They were just black, completely black. Two empty dark shapes staring back at me. They looked less like eyes and more like holes, like someone had made a doll and forgotten to paint the face. Neither of us moved for several seconds. She kept her hands on my shoulders, holding me in place, and I was too scared to do anything but stare. When I finally started trying to pull away, she let go and stood up. Her head turned slowly, scanning the room once, almost like she was searching for something. Then she moved toward the open classroom door. To fit through it, she had to duck. She was that tall. When she straightened up again in the hallway, she kept walking. And for some reason, I followed her. I found her standing outside the nurse's office, looking through the small window in the door. I could hear voices inside. My teacher was crying and blaming herself. I remember hearing her say she should have been paying better attention. But it wasn't her fault. No one knew James had a peanut allergy. His parents had never told the school. No one could have known. The nurse said something I couldn't hear, and then the teacher came out of the office with a tissue in one hand and a phone in the other. "I'm going to call his parents again," she said. "The ambulance should be here any minute." She hurried away down the hall. The strange woman slipped into the nurse's office just before the door closed. I ran after her and squeezed inside too. James was sitting on one of the beds against the wall. His breathing was rough and shaky, but calmer than before. One hand rested on his thigh, rubbing the spot where I later realized someone must have given him a shot. His eyes were fixed on the woman. He could see her too. That mattered. Even then, even as a child, some part of me understood how important that was. Jane shifted back on the bed as she came closer. One of her hands lifted and touched his swollen cheek very softly. The other moved into his hair, gently stroking it. To my surprise, he relaxed. A tear ran down his face as he leaned into her hand. "I want," he whispered, fighting for breath, "my mommy." The woman bent down and touched the place where her mouth should have been to the center of his forehead. A kiss. James let out a long, trembling breath. I stood there and watched her keep him calm until the paramedics came. I watched them lift him onto a stretcher. I watched them carry him down the hall. And I watched her follow him into the ambulance. James never came back to school. The second time I saw her was in 5th grade. It happened during recess. A huge crowd of us had gathered by the jungle gym because two sisters, Tanya and Marjorie, were fighting over which one of them was braver. They were always doing things like that. The week before, they had dared each other to eat some disgusting mixture one of the boys had made out of cafeteria food. It had ended exactly the way you would expect, with a lot of vomiting and several kids screaming. That day, Tanya had her hands on her hips and a smug look on her face. "I can stand on top of the monkey bars," she announced. "Prove it," Marjorie shot back. Tanya climbed right up and, to everyone's surprise, carefully stood on the top bar in the middle. Her knees shook, but she managed it. We all clapped and shouted. When she climbed down, she looked proud of herself. Marjorie was furious. "Oh yeah?" she snapped. "Well, I can climb the beast." The whole crowd gasped. The beast was what we called the massive oak tree at the far edge of the field. It had a huge trunk and thick branches, and none of us had ever managed to climb it properly. Kids tried all the time, but they usually slid right back down. If Marjorie could actually do it, people would talk about it for the rest of the year. Tanya laughed. "No, you can't." "Yes, I can." And then Marjorie took off running. The rest of us ran after her. By the time we reached the tree, a ring of kids had formed around it. Some were cheering for her. Others were shouting that she'd never make it. Marjorie tied her hair back and pressed one shoe against the trunk, like she was testing her position. Then she jumped and started climbing. We all watched her inch her way higher. She was better than I expected. She used every knot and rough patch in the bark. When she slipped, she caught herself. When she lost balance, she adjusted. By the time she reached halfway up the tree, I felt that old cold feeling crawl up the back of my neck. I turned. There she was. The woman stood at the edge of the crowd, hands folded behind her back, her black eyes fixed on Marjorie. My stomach dropped. I pushed through the other kids until I was standing in front of her. I cleared my throat, hoping to get her attention. Nothing. I did it again. Still nothing. Finally, I reached out and tugged lightly on her jacket. "Hi," I said. Her head tilted down, and those empty black eyes met mine. I suddenly felt stupid. "I like your tie," I said awkwardly. She gave no sign that she had heard me. I turned back toward the tree just in time to see Marjorie grab the first branch. The crowd gasped again. A second later, she managed to pull herself up and sit on it. Everybody started cheering. Marjorie looked down at Tanya with a big grin. "I told you I could do it," she called. Then she started climbing higher. The woman stepped forward. That was when I knew something was wrong. Up on the hill, one of the teachers had finally noticed where we all were. "What are you doing down there?" he shouted. "Get away from that tree right now. There's only 5 minutes of recess left." Kids started complaining, but they listened. One by one, they began moving away. I didn't. I stared at the woman, then at Marjorie, then back at the woman. "Marjorie," I yelled, "you have to come down." "No way," she shouted back. "I'm going to the top." I didn't know what to do. I was too far away to climb up after her, and even if I tried, I probably would have fallen too. The teacher was still at the top of the hill, too far to stop her in time. In a panic, I grabbed the woman's arm. "You have to stop her," I begged. "Please." For the first time, she looked at me. "You have to do something." Slowly, she raised one pale hand and turned it so the palm faced me. Then, one by one, she curled in her fingers. 5, 4, 3, 2. Marjorie hit the ground before I saw the last finger move. The sound is something I have never forgotten. It was wet and heavy and final. Kids on the hill started screaming. I looked down and saw Marjorie lying twisted in the wood chips. One leg bent the wrong way, one arm broken so badly the bone had pushed through the skin. Blood was leaking from one ear. A leaf had landed against one of her open eyes. My hands dropped to my sides. The woman moved past me and knelt beside the body. She touched Marjorie's cheek with a softness that felt almost impossible after what had just happened. Her head bowed and her eyes closed. She stayed that way for a moment, like she was giving the girl peace, like she was honoring something. Then she stood up again and looked at me. Just once. Her head dipped slightly. A nod. Then she walked behind the oak tree and disappeared. The school closed for 2 weeks after that. When we came back, the tree had been cut down. After those first 2 times, I kept seeing her. Years passed, and she was always there when death was close. A star quarterback from the high school died in a drunk driving crash on prom night. I saw her standing near the wreck. I witnessed a pileup on the highway on my way to college. She was already there before the ambulances arrived. At a fraternity party, a guy jumped off the roof on a dare and cracked his skull against the edge of the pool. I looked up through all the shouting and saw her in the crowd, still and silent as ever. No one else ever seemed to notice her. No one except James. That was what kept me from dismissing her as imagination. Then, just before my college graduation, my father called. My grandmother had been in the hospital for several weeks. She was 92, frail, tired, and getting worse. My dad didn't say much, but he didn't need to. I packed a bag immediately and drove home. At the hospital, I stood off to the side while my parents spoke with the doctor. I only caught pieces of it. She's not improving. Not much time. Prepare yourselves. My mother started crying and hurried down the hall. My father went after her. I slipped into my grandmother's room. The woman was already there. She sat in a chair by the bed, watching my grandmother sleep. Her thumbs tapped together softly, matching the slow rhythm of the old woman's breathing. I stopped on the other side of the bed. "Does she have to go?" I asked. No response. How much longer? Nothing. That was normal. She almost never answered me. Over the years, I had made up every theory I could think of. Maybe she was some kind of ghost. Maybe she was death itself. Maybe I was seeing things. But she was real. I knew she was real. My grandmother coughed weakly. The woman stood up at once and pulled the blanket higher, tucking it around her shoulders. Then she wiped the sweat from my grandmother's forehead and moved the gray hair away from her face. Every gesture was careful and gentle. Then the woman placed one hand over my grandmother's heart. Her shoulders dropped for just a second. It was the closest thing to sadness I had ever seen on her face. She leaned down and touched her mouthless face to my grandmother's forehead. Another kiss. Her chin moved slightly, almost like she was whispering something I couldn't hear. My grandmother's breathing began to falter. Her hand tightened in the blanket. Her chest rose one last time, then slowly fell. The monitor gave one long, steady tone. I lowered my head. For a few seconds, we both stood there in silence. When I looked up again, the woman was watching me. My lip trembled. "Thank you," I said. Later, I sat outside the hospital on the curb with a cigarette between my fingers. I had just flicked my lighter open when she sat down beside me. I froze. Then I shut the lighter and set it down. "Thank you," I said again. She folded her hands neatly over one knee. Her thumbs tapped 3 times and then went still. I looked at her face, at the black eyes turned toward the night sky. She had not changed at all since 2nd grade. Same hair, same suit, same impossible stillness. "Why can I see you?" I asked. She lowered her chin, but said nothing. "Do you have a name?" Her fingers tapped softly again. I sighed. "Please?" At last, she moved. One pale hand lifted and pointed upward. I followed her finger and looked at the sky. The moon hung above the hospital, pale and distant, among a few weak stars. "Moon?" I asked. Her hand lowered. I smiled. I liked that name. We sat there quietly after that. For once, there was no body nearby. No screaming, no blood. Just the 2 of us outside a hospital under the night sky. It felt peaceful. I should have left it there. but I never knew when to stop talking. "So," I said, trying to joke, "how many years am I taking off my life if I smoke this cigarette?" My smile faded. "Right," I said quietly. I stared out at the parking lot for a moment. "Will I die from smoking?" No answer. "What about a car crash? House fire?" Silence. Then, because I was nervous and stupid, I said, "Spontaneous combustion?" She pinched the bridge of where her nose should have been, and I actually laughed. What? It could happen. For the first time in all the years I had known her, she seemed almost amused. That made me feel strangely warm inside, like somehow I had earned a little piece of her attention. And then, out of nowhere, a terrible thought pushed its way into my mind. It was one of those thoughts people get and instantly try to ignore. A dark question from somewhere deep inside. The kind that comes too fast and feels too personal. But once it was there, I couldn't stop myself. I looked at her and asked, "Am I going to kill myself?" The silence that followed felt different from every other silence we had ever shared. She went completely still. No tapping fingers. No small movement. Nothing. Then her expression changed. Her brows drew together. Her head tilted slightly. Her body leaned toward me just a little. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It looked like concern, like the way someone looks at a person who has fallen apart in front of them and is pretending they're fine. And in that moment, I had my answer. She never said a word. She didn't need to. Story 5. A few weeks ago, I turned 18. For my birthday, my father decided to make a big gesture. He stood in front of everyone during my small party and handed me the keys to the car I had already been driving for months. It wasn't a new car. In fact, it was the same one I used whenever I needed to go somewhere. The difference was that now, according to him, it officially belonged to me. I wouldn't need to ask permission anymore. That simple announcement felt like freedom. To celebrate the moment, I decided to take a trip to visit family members who lived up in the Appalachian Mountains. The drive there was about 4 hours. I planned to stay for a few days and then drive the 4 hours back home. It would be the longest drive I had ever done by myself. The trip there went smoothly. I arrived at my grandfather's house in the mountains, where I would be staying. My cousin lived there too, and we had always been close growing up. The house itself was old and full of strange heirlooms that had been in the family for generations. Every room seemed to hold some story. For the first few days, things were calm. My grandfather told me stories about relatives I had never met and events that had happened long before I was born. My cousin added details that I had never heard before. I couldn't tell if they were telling me more because I was older now or because my parents weren't there to filter the stories. Either way, I enjoyed listening. 4 days into my visit, we had a large family dinner. 2 of my uncles came over along with a few other cousins and their partners. Everyone gathered around my grandfather's table. The conversation was loud and lively at first. But that night, I made a mistake. Because I had just turned 18 and felt like an adult, I decided to share something about myself that I had been keeping quiet for a long time. I thought maybe my family would accept it. I thought maybe they would understand. Instead, the room exploded into shouting. My uncles started yelling. Someone slammed a hand on the table. My cousin tried to calm everyone down, but it didn't help. The look my grandfather gave me before I went to bed that night told me everything I needed to know. I had crossed a line that, in their minds, could never be uncrossed. Later that night, I texted my cousin. He tried to comfort me and said things might calm down in the morning. But I already knew what I was going to do I told him I was leaving. I would drive home the next day without telling anyone. If my father heard even half the things his brothers had said to me that night, he would lose his mind. I didn't want to deal with that kind of explosion on top of everything else. So I quietly packed my duffel bag. It was half neat and half stuffed with whatever I could grab quickly. Just before sunrise, I carried it out to my car and started the drive home. The early morning light was soft and pink as the sun slowly rose over the mountains. Driving east meant I could watch the sunrise through my windshield. For the first time since the night before, I felt my anger and sadness begin to fade. The mountains looked beautiful in that early light. The trees were dark shapes against the brightening sky. I even smiled a little. Then, I heard a loud mechanical bang. The car jerked violently. A strange whistling sound followed as the vehicle suddenly began slowing down. It felt like most of the car still wanted to move forward, but one important part had completely failed. I managed to guide the car onto the wide shoulder of the road before it fully stopped. I was still deep in mountain country. Thick pine forests surrounded the road on both sides. The trees were so dense they blocked almost everything from view. You could barely see 10 feet into the woods. I leaned forward and slammed my forehead gently against the steering wheel. This cannot be happening right now, I muttered to myself. The frustration built inside me until I let out a long groan that emptied all the air from my lungs. I tried to calm down. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a moment, letting my mind drift away from the situation. That was when I heard the tapping, a light knock on the window. My head turned slowly toward the sound. A man stood outside the driver's side window. He looked completely ordinary. Average height, average build, plain clothes. Nothing about him stood out. For a few seconds we just stared at each other. My face probably looked exhausted and miserable. His face, on the other hand, held a warm smile that seemed almost too friendly. I rolled the window down just a little. "Hello?" I said. "Break down?" he asked with a slight tilt of his head. "Yeah," I replied. "Heard a bang, and now the car won't move." He nodded slowly. "Want to ride into town?" he asked. His smile stayed exactly the same. "Sure," I said automatically. "Let me just grab." I stopped speaking. I had looked into the rearview mirror expecting to see his vehicle parked behind me. There was nothing there. "Where's your car?" I asked. "I'll show you," he said. "Just come on out." His smile widened even more. Something about it suddenly felt wrong. We stood there in silence for a moment before he slapped his hand flat against the roof of my car. "Well, alrighty then," he said before turning and walking down the road. I watched him through the mirror as he slowly disappeared behind the car. I rubbed my eyes for a moment, trying to fight the stress headache forming in my head. When I looked back up, he was gone. Just gone. The road behind me was empty. I locked the doors. For a moment, I considered calling my parents, but I didn't want to explain why I was leaving early. Instead, I pulled out my phone and searched for the nearest garage that offered towing services. The signal out in the mountains was terrible. It took several minutes just to load a single page. Eventually, I found a garage that could send a tow truck. I called them and explained my location as best as I could. They said the truck would arrive in about 30 minutes. I sat there waiting. About 10 minutes later, I heard the roar of a large engine coming from behind me. That was fast, I thought. A tow truck pulled smoothly onto the shoulder behind my car. The driver stepped out. He looked like a typical mechanic from the area. Mid-40s, rough clothes, tired expression. He walked around my car slowly, touching different parts and examining the exterior. "You doing all right, sir?" he asked in a flat voice. "Yeah," I said. "Just want to get home." He ignored the rest of what I was saying and moved to the front of the car. "You didn't see some random guy on the road, did you?" I asked. He didn't respond. He just stared at the hood. "Pop the hood," he said suddenly. I searched for the latch inside the car. I always forgot where it was. The mechanic moved closer to my door. "Want some help?" he asked. "No, I've got it," I said. He leaned down closer. "Just open the door. I'll pop it for you." His hand hovered near the handle. "No," I said. "Just tell me where the latch is. Open the door." His voice hadn't changed, but something in the atmosphere suddenly felt heavier. I looked at his face carefully. That was when I realized something. His chest wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. His eyes looked wet, but strangely glassy. "What garage did you come from?" I asked slowly. "The one in town?" he replied. That made no sense. The closest town didn't even have a garage. "Get away from my car," I said quietly. He didn't move. Behind him, the leaves in the forest rustled. Then, another man stepped out of the trees. It was the same man who had knocked on my window earlier. They both stood there staring at me. Neither of them blinked. Neither of them breathed. I climbed into the back seat and curled up, waiting. Minutes passed. They didn't move. Eventually, I called 911. I explained everything as quickly as I could. The operator told me officers would arrive soon. Then the call cut off. Night fell. I sat in the back seat with my knees against my chest. When exhaustion finally took over, I fell asleep. When I woke up, sunlight was shining through the window. For a brief moment, I thought everything from the day before had been a dream. Then, I looked out the window. The two men were still there, standing exactly where they had been, staring into the driver's seat. And sometime during the night, 3 more had arrived. 5 figures surrounded the car. None of them moved. None of them blinked. Days passed. More of them appeared. They tapped on the windows. They stood silently. They surrounded the car completely. I stopped being able to tell how much time had passed. Eventually, the sunlight disappeared entirely. The car was surrounded so tightly that no light could get through. I lived on the few snacks and water bottles left in the car. I slept in short bursts. I relieved myself in bags and bottles. The smell inside the car became unbearable. Time stopped making sense. Then one day I heard something. A loud rumbling engine. Gunshots. Suddenly, sunlight exploded through the windows. One of the figures outside collapsed. Then another. Then another. I rushed to the driver's seat as more gunshots echoed through the forest. One by one, the figures fell. A large armored truck pulled up behind me. SWAT was written on the side. A man in tactical gear ran toward my car. I was saved. He reached the door. "Let's get you out of here, sir," he said. His hand grabbed the handle. My hand moved toward the lock from the inside. Then I stopped. Something felt wrong. "It's unlocked," I said slowly. The man stared at me. I glanced into the rearview mirror. All the figures that had fallen were standing again, perfectly still, watching me. I don't know where I am anymore. If anyone finds this, please help me. Story 6. Last night, I heard whispering inside the walls of my apartment. I live in a fairly ordinary building. It's a big brick structure with 5 floors and dozens of units. Nothing special or interesting about it. The city itself isn't particularly exciting either. It's not one of those places people move to because they dream of living there. It's more like a stop along the way, a place people pass through while heading somewhere better. Most people don't stay here long. The town is full of small businesses, quiet residential streets, and buildings like mine. Everything feels temporary, like the whole place exists to serve people who never really planned to settle here. But it suits me fine. I don't mind living somewhere quiet. Last night, it was close to 2 in the morning. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, not really paying attention to anything in particular. I was just killing time before I tried to sleep. That was when I heard the whispering. At first, I assumed it was coming from the apartment next door. That's the usual explanation for strange sounds in a building like this. The walls aren't very thick, and sometimes you can hear people talking or moving furniture. But the layout of my apartment made that explanation feel wrong almost immediately. My unit is in the corner of the building. The only neighboring apartment shares a wall on the opposite side of my place. The wall behind my bed faces the outside of the building. There shouldn't have been anything on the other side of it. I stopped scrolling and listened more carefully. The whispering continued. It was faint at first, so quiet that I wasn't even sure I was hearing real words. But the longer I focused on it, the clearer it became. I slowly sat up and leaned back until my head rested against the wall behind my bed. Logically, I knew there was nothing there. I live on the 5th floor. Outside that wall, there's just open air and the drop down to the street. Still, the more I listened, the easier it became to make out the voices. They sounded like several people having a conversation in hushed tones. For a moment, I wondered if someone was outside on the street talking loudly enough for the sound to carry upward. But I've lived here long enough to know how sound travels in this area. Even loud arguments on the sidewalk below barely reach the upper floors. This was different. These voices sounded like they were right behind my head. I leaned closer to the wall and strained to understand what they were saying. Then, I heard something that made my entire body go cold. He's listening to us. I don't know if I can fully explain the feeling that hit me in that moment. Imagine standing on a beach and seeing a massive wave rushing toward the shore. You know it's going to hit you. You know there's nowhere to run. But your body refuses to move. That's what it felt like. My mouth went completely dry. My hands froze around my phone. Someone had just acknowledged me. Someone who shouldn't have been able to know I was there. For several seconds, I didn't move at all. I just sat there, my back pressed against the wall, waiting for something else to happen. Slowly, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The bright white beam filled my bedroom as I swept it across the walls, the floor, the closet door. There was nothing. My girlfriend wasn't there. She had gone back to her own apartment earlier that night. No one else had been over. There was no one sleeping on my couch, no one quietly talking on a phone somewhere in the apartment. I checked every corner of the room with the light. Still nothing. Then suddenly something slammed into the wall behind me. The impact was loud and violent enough to jolt me forward on the bed. I jumped up instantly, spinning around and shining the flashlight directly at the wall. There was no damage, no cracks, no dents. I didn't even see dust drifting through the air. For context, I'm not someone who scares easily. I'm 6'4" and a little over 200 pounds. Most people who know me would describe me as confident, maybe even intimidating. I've been in fights before. I've been in dangerous situations where things could have gone very badly. But this was something else entirely. Standing there in my bedroom, staring at that blank wall, I started shaking. My teeth were chattering, like I was standing outside in the middle of winter. I've experienced anxiety before, And I know what panic attacks feel like. The familiar tightness in the chest, the racing thoughts, the sense that something terrible is about to happen. That's exactly what was starting to settle over me. Except this felt worse. Someone, or something, knew I was listening, and I had absolutely no idea how that was possible. The sound hitting the wall felt like a warning, or maybe a threat. I kept the flashlight aimed at the wall while I slowly backed away from the bed. Every instinct in my body was telling me to get out of that room. I stepped into the hallway and moved toward the living room. The beam of light still pointed behind me. My apartment isn't huge, but the living room is definitely bigger than the bedroom. Being in an open space made me feel slightly less trapped. I walked over to the couch and sat down, still holding my phone like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Every sense I had was on high alert. I was so tense that I felt like I could hear the smallest sound in the entire building. If a moth had flown through the room, I probably would have heard its wings. I stayed like that for a long time. Eventually, I started scrolling through my phone again, just to distract myself. News, videos, random posts, anything that would keep my brain from replaying that moment over and over again. At some point, I must have drifted off to sleep on the couch. Since then, my nights haven't been the same. My sleep has been broken and restless. I wake up multiple times during the night, listening carefully for any sound coming from the walls. Lying in my bed now feels impossible. Every time I try, I end up staring at that wall behind my head, waiting, listening. Part of me thinks I should just start sleeping on the couch permanently, because every night when I lie there in the dark, my ears tune themselves to a strange frequency I never noticed before. And I wait for the whispering to start again, for those voices behind the wall, for the moment when they realize I'm listening. Story 7. Are you sure about what you're doing? The hooded man let out a long sigh before answering. I do. Using this song like this tells me exactly who you are, Brandon. He lowered his head for a second. I guess it wasn't much of a surprise, he said. Then he pulled off the hood and mask. At least you'll die hearing your favorite song turned into torture while you starve. My favorite song. Even then, tied up and half out of my mind, that part hit me the hardest. Not because I was shocked he knew it, but because it made me understand how long this had been building. Brandon had never liked me as much as I thought he did. I knew we were different, but I never realized how deep his resentment went. He was the kind of guy people noticed right away. Tall, broad shoulders, good face, the sort of guy who could have been popular if he knew how to carry himself. I was smaller, louder, more social, and somehow that made me easier to like. People came to me first. Teachers remembered me. Girls talked to me. Brandon saw all of that, and maybe he had been measuring himself against me from the start. We met Pearl at around the same time. The moment Brandon saw her, he was gone. Completely gone. Some people fall in love in a single second, or at least they think they do. Brandon was one of those people. I wasn't. I thought she was pretty, sure, but I never got attached that fast. I liked to watch people first, figure them out, see whether what they showed the world matched what they really were. Brandon didn't work that way. He saw a pretty girl being nice to him and built a whole future in his head before the conversation was over. For a while, though, he was still a good friend. Funny how often stories about murder start with a sentence like that. People talk about love triangles like they're dramatic and exciting, but most of the time they're just ugly. Jealousy makes people ridiculous first, then cruel, then dangerous. Losing a friendship over a girl is common enough. Trying to kill someone over one should be where any normal person stops. Brandon, it turned out, was not normal. The year 220 gave a lot of sick people new ideas. There were no normal school days, no packed hallways, no parties, no football games, no easy stage for someone to play masked killer. If a person wanted to hurt people and hide behind the chaos of that year, they had to get creative. Brandon did. I guess everybody has some kind of talent. His just happened to be murder. The first person who died was Vanessa. Vanessa was Pearl's best friend. She was funny, warm, and the kind of person who could make a room feel lighter without trying. By the time she died, I had known Pearl for over 2 years. Pearl and I had gotten close enough that people assumed we were heading towards something serious, and maybe from the outside, it looked that way. Vanessa's death was awful not just because she died, but because of how quickly the world tried to explain it away. It got folded into the fear of that year, almost immediately. Another sudden death. Another sad headline. Another case people talked about for 2 days before moving on. Pearl was the one who comforted me. Looking back, that still makes me feel sick. She sat beside me and spoke softly, like she understood pain better than anyone else. "It's okay to cry," she told me. "You don't believe the way I do. You don't think you'll see her again, so it's okay to cry for her. She was your friend too." She said it kindly, gently, with the kind of softness that lowers your guard. Something inside me broke. I cried harder than I had meant to. I told her I wanted to find whoever did it. She didn't like that. She told me revenge was wrong, that anger would only poison me. But she didn't push too hard. Not then. Pearl was preparing to become a missionary. She had lost a year of school somewhere along the way, so she was older than most people in our grade and was about to turn 18 the next year. After graduation, she was supposed to leave for another country in Europe. I honestly can't remember which one now. At the time, it felt important. Now it feels like one more detail buried under everything that happened. I used to tease her sometimes and call her my pretty Mormon. She hated that. Every time I said it over text, she would complain about it the next time we met and hit me lightly on the arm. She said if I was going to talk about her faith, I could at least do it respectfully. I told her the full title took too long to type. She never liked the joke, but she tolerated it. We still met in person during that period, even when everyone was supposed to be careful and stay apart. She hated the distance. I didn't love it either, but I was more cautious. Pearl would always be the one to convince me. She would say we were fine, that we were being dramatic, that one little meeting wouldn't hurt. We met without masks, sometimes, without caring enough, without thinking enough. We were lucky, I guess, or maybe unlucky, depending on how you look at what came later. After Vanessa died, Pearl checked on me over and over. She asked how I was sleeping, if I was eating, if I was holding up. One day she smiled at me and said, "Let me take a picture for the times when life feels too heavy. This way, if you ever feel hopeless, you'll remember how precious a life really is." At the time, I thought it was one of those strange emotional things people say when they think they are helping. I let her take the picture. I didn't think about it again. Not until I was tied up in a basement. Not until days later, when I was certain I was going to die, and that photograph came sliding under a door, like a message from the devil. The place where Brandon took me was a cabin somewhere in the middle of nowhere, near a swamp so full of crocodiles that even if I escaped into the wrong direction, I might not make it far. That was one of the first things that broke my spirit. Not just that I was trapped, but that the world around the trap had been chosen carefully. Whoever planned it wanted every possible path to lead toward fear. I lost hope after about 20 hours. I had screamed until my throat burned raw. I had called out for help until my voice cracked and thinned into nothing. Then I just sat there breathing in damp air and listening to my favorite song play over and over, louder than it needed to be, until it stopped sounding like music and turned into punishment. I remember thinking, even in that state, that Brandon had somehow developed a poetic side. The thought was bitter and stupid, but that's what fear does. It makes your mind jump in strange directions, because the truth is too ugly to look at directly. It's easy to act calm in front of the person trying to kill you. Pride helps. Anger helps. Shock helps. You can throw out one-liners, pretend you don't care, make yourself feel like the hero in your own story. But once you are alone, once the door shuts and the sound of the lock settles in your bones, that performance falls apart fast. I was terrified. I was angry too, but fear came first. And underneath both of those was disbelief. Brandon? Really? Him? That was the part my brain kept tripping over. I could picture murder coming from a stranger more easily than from somebody I had joked around with, sat next to, trusted. He had never acted strange enough around me to make me suspect him. We hardly saw each other in person after schools closed. Vanessa died about a month into the pandemic, and because everything was chaos, her funeral was limited and controlled and distant. We weren't even properly there. The official story said it was related to COVID. Another statistic. Another case to be counted and buried. I didn't believe it, not fully. Pearl never once questioned why I didn't believe it. At the time, that felt like support. Later, I understood it differently. Vanessa had looked perfectly healthy the day before she died. That fact kept replaying in my head while I was tied there. At some point, the physical pain started helping me think. Hunger sharpens certain thoughts. So does dehydration. I had no food, no water, and I was tied against a boiler in a wet, miserable room where the heat made me sweat faster than my body could handle. I had also been drugged before I woke up there. I still don't know with what. I just know that coming off it made my body feel wrong in ways I had never imagined. Tremors, nausea, that horrible hollow feeling like your insides are slipping out of rhythm. Movies don't show that part well. They show a person waking up, tied to a chair, then talking clearly, making plans, waiting for their chance. They leave out the headaches, the confusion, the way your body stops feeling like it belongs to you. Somewhere in that physical collapse, a realization hit me hard enough to cut through the fog. Brandon had learned how to hide a murder inside the panic of the time. Sudden death, confusion, misdirection, fear. A quiet overdose could become part of the noise of that year. He didn't need blood or drama. He just needed timing. And then the thought got even worse. Vanessa had died because of me. I tried to reject that idea at first. I told myself I was delirious, starving, panicking, but another realization followed right behind it, and this one was even more terrible. Pearl. By the time the photograph slid under the basement door, I had already been broken down enough that I could barely sit upright. Still, I saw it clearly. It was the picture Pearl had taken of me nearly 6 months earlier, 4 months after her own supposed death. That's probably the moment when the last of my confusion died. Pearl wasn't dead. Pearl had never taken that picture as comfort. It had always been a reminder, a private little signal, a trophy. And then all the old memories changed shape at once. Before Vanessa died, she and I had been meeting secretly, not once, Not accidentally. Repeatedly, I had been cheating on Pearl with her best friend. That is the truth, and it should be said plainly. For a long time, I tried to tell the story in a way that made me seem less ugly. I would lead with Pearl, with Brandon, with the murders, with all the dramatic pieces that made me look like the damaged survivor instead of the selfish idiot at the center of the emotional wreckage. But the truth is simpler than that. I betrayed one girl and helped destroy another. Brandon may have been the killer, but I gave all of them reasons to hate me. And Brandon, I finally understood, had not been the mastermind. Pearl had. The memory of how things really started came back in pieces. One day before schools shut down, Vanessa and I were talking, like we always did. She seemed distracted, softer than usual. I joked around with her and then said, "You've got a boyfriend, I reckon." She laughed at the word reckon, because I liked using weird old-fashioned language now and then. Mostly because I thought it made me sound clever. In America, that sort of thing stands out just enough to get attention. I won't lie and say I wasn't trying to impress girls with it. Vanessa had been more than a crush by then. I cared about her in a way that felt real. Not instant, not shallow. Real. When I pressed her again, she finally said no. She didn't have a boyfriend. Then she started explaining that Pearl liked me. Really liked me. Strongly enough that it had become impossible for Vanessa to ignore. I knew exactly where the conversation was going before she finished. I remember saying something cold about Pearl confusing a crush with love because of her religious background. Vanessa didn't like that. She got angry for a second, then sad. She told me she didn't want Pearl to get hurt. She told me we were all heading toward graduation and bigger lives, and that maybe the kind thing, the simple thing, was not to make everything harder than it already was. She was looking out for Pearl over herself. That was who Vanessa was. A kind girl. A genuinely kind girl. She was religious too, but differently. Less rigid. Less consumed by rules. She talked about faith like it was supposed to make you gentler, not harder. She had told me once about being encouraged toward missionary life, about being told what God wanted from her future. I remember talking her out of it, or trying to. I thought I was helping. Maybe that was one of the first falling pieces in a chain I never saw. Eventually, she stepped aside. She helped set Pearl and me up. That still hurts to remember. I went along with it because it was easy, because I was selfish, because I assumed there would always be time to sort out what I really felt. And I never once stopped to think about Brandon and how deeply he was attached to Pearl. If I had, maybe I could have stepped back. Maybe I could have prevented something. Or maybe that's just guilt trying to right itself, a kinder version of the past. When I was tied up in that basement and that photograph slid in front of me, it gave me something stronger than fear for the first time since I had been taken. It gave me rage. I don't know where the strength came from. Maybe shock. Maybe adrenaline. Maybe the body keeps emergency power hidden until it thinks death is close enough to touch. I only know that I pushed, twisted, tore skin, scraped bone, and somehow got free. I didn't even realize one of my hands was broken until I crashed backward onto the floor after the last restraint gave way. I got up and ran. I ran like an animal. No plan, no grace, just movement. Brandon must have heard me hit the floor because he was already moving back toward the room. When he reached the doorway, I hit him full force. He hadn't expected me to still be capable of fighting. We both slammed to the ground. He was bigger than me, stronger than me, healthier than me. But surprise can do a lot. I got up first and kept running. At first, I wanted revenge. Then survival took over. Anger is loud, but instinct is louder. I burst into another room and froze. Pearl stood up from a couch so quickly that the motion itself felt unreal. Seeing someone you believe is dead standing in front of you does something terrible to the mind. People talk about grief like it's a slow ache, but sometimes it becomes a physical force. My body locked up. My skin went cold. For a second, I thought I might actually die from the shock alone. "You killed her," I screamed, though by then I already knew. I needed to hear myself say something, needed my body to wake back up. Pearl looked annoyed, more than frightened. That might have been the worst part. There she was, alive, holding a book as if she had simply been reading while waiting for my escape attempt to entertain her. One finger was still tucked between the pages to keep her place. Brandon came into the room behind me, breathing hard. "It's okay, love," Pearl said to him, calm as ever. "The heretic and I need to talk." There was no panic in Brandon, no anger either. Just obedience. He stepped back. That told me almost everything. I asked for water because I could feel my body beginning to fail. But Pearl looked offended by the request. She made some cruel comment about what I deserved instead, comparing me to Christ in a way that was blasphemous and mocking at the same time. I answered with a joke because I didn't know what else to do. Humor is a pathetic shield, but sometimes it's all you have left. Then I asked her why she killed Vanessa. She answered the way fanatics do when they have wrapped violence in moral language. She said she had saved Vanessa, said she had stopped her before she could go too far from God, said it like murder could become mercy if you believed in it strongly enough. I interrupted her. I told her the truth she didn't want to hear, that Vanessa had spoken beautifully about her, that Vanessa loved her, that Vanessa had been torn apart trying to protect her and still live her own life. I told Pearl she had killed someone who cared for her deeply. That was when Pearl's face, not the patient one, the real one. She screamed that she had saved Vanessa's soul. I told her maybe she would never know what love looked like because she had destroyed it the moment she saw it. I also told her I was at fault. I was. I may not have killed anyone, but I set fires I didn't respect enough to put out. Brandon, confused and shaking, suddenly had an axe in his hands. I still don't know where he had been keeping it. He rushed toward me, ready to finish things the brutal way this time. Then we all heard something outside. A boat engine. Voices. Brandon stopped. Pearl looked afraid for the first time. I didn't wait. I launched myself through a window because I knew if strangers found us with Pearl standing there looking innocent and frightened, she would turn herself into the victim in seconds. She had the face for it, the voice for it, the whole act. I hit the ground outside and screamed for help. Everything after that happened fast and strangely. Brandon was too far gone by then, full of drugs and guilt and love twisted into obedience. Someone nearby, a man who looked like the kind of local you would never expect to save your life, saw enough and acted fast enough. Brandon got shot before he could reach me again. I remember shouting, "She's with him. She killed Vanessa." Then everything went dark. I spent about a month in the hospital. Brandon survived long enough to confess and testify. He admitted his part. He named Pearl. He described what they had done. Maybe guilt finally broke through whatever hold she had on him. Maybe he simply couldn't carry it anymore. Pearl was arrested for attempted murder, and her church cast her out. At the trial, I told the truth. All of it. Not just the kidnapping, and the fake death and Vanessa's murder. I told them about the cheating too. I expected it to matter more than it did. At one point, it was basically said out loud that betraying your girlfriend is disgusting. But it is not a legal defense for murder. The judge looked right at Pearl when that point was made. I still remember that. Her defense tried to paint her as temporarily insane, pushed into extremism by her parents, shaped by years of pressure until she thought she was doing God's work. Maybe some of that was true, but the planning was too detailed. The fake death, the photograph, the use of a public health crisis to hide a murder. None of that looked temporary. None of it looked accidental. In the end, she got far less time than I thought she deserved. Her family managed to have her treated as a minor in some parts of the process. Because she had not directly carried out every act herself, she ended up in a mental hospital as part of it. Later, she faked her death. Even now, that sounds ridiculous when I say it plainly, but it happened. At least her family had to pay financially for some of the damage. They told me they forgave me. I told them to go to hell. Vanessa's parents did not forgive me, and I can't blame them. I apologized anyway. Vanessa once told me that an apology is something you owe when you have done wrong, whether the other person accepts it or not. Forgiveness is a gift, she said, and nobody owes you a gift. Repentance is your job. Mercy is not. That sounded wise when she said it. It sounds harder now. One sentence of hers has stayed with me more than any other. She once told me that graves are not really where our loved ones rest. Not in the deepest sense. She said a grave is more like a church, a place that helps you focus, a place where you can speak clearly to the dead because the world gets quiet enough to hear yourself. Then, she said, you can still burn your hand if you touch the dying embers a person leaves behind. I understand that now. I still visit her grave. I don't go because I think she is there in the dirt beneath the stone. I go because it is one of the only places where I can force myself to stop lying. I talk to her there. I tell her I was selfish. I tell her I was a coward. I tell her I should have chosen honesty earlier, should have protected her better, should have seen the danger growing around us before it became impossible to stop. And sometimes I just stand there in silence and remember her smile, not Pearl's fake smile, not Brandon's bitter one, Vanessa's, the kind one. That is what stayed alive after everything else was ruined. Story 8, the waiting room was dim and strangely warm. I sat in a small folding chair covered in brown leather, trying to stay calm while I waited for my name to be called. Everything in that room was some shade of brown. The walls were painted a dry desert tan. The floor was made of old cedar boards, scratched and worn by years of shoes dragging across them. Beside me stood a side table stained a dark walnut color, and on top of it sat a terracotta vase holding a tall snake plant with bright green leaves. The only break in that dull, heavy color scheme came from the two doors. To my left was a black wooden door that led back outside the facility. It looked heavy and important, almost proud of itself, towering over the room like it knew it held the only way out. To my right was a polished silver metal door that led deeper into the building. That was the one I cared about. Beyond that door was the examination room. Beyond that room was the reason I had come. I was there to take part in a trial for IBM. I had been selected to help train their newest and most advanced project, something called the Machine-Operated Mind. The pamphlet had shortened it to MOM, which I found slightly funny the first time I read it, though by then I had gone over the little booklet so many times that even the humor had started to fade. Still, the meaning of it all had not faded. I was about to be involved in something important, It felt like history. More than that, it felt like opportunity. If this went well, I would receive a recommendation from a senior IBM researcher. I had already imagined what that would look like on my resume. A clean line of text, in sharp serif font. My name above it, my qualifications below it. And in the middle, that powerful reference, proof that I had worked with one of the biggest names in the world of computing. I kept picturing hiring managers reading it and immediately deciding I was worth their time. I could feel my future opening up in front of me. That thought made it hard to sit still. I tapped my fingernail against the side table and tried not to smile too widely. The muscles in my cheeks already ached from how long I had been grinning to myself. I looked back down at the pamphlet to keep my hands busy. Without really thinking about it, I had started chewing at the rough skin around my fingertips again. I forced myself to stop and flipped through the pages instead. The MOM, according to the pamphlet, was a major step forward in machine intelligence. It would learn language through structured interaction. It would improve based on guided responses. It would eventually be capable of something close to human conversation. That was what the trial was about. People like me would sit down with the machine, review its responses, correct them, and teach it how real language worked. A human mind shaping an artificial one. I liked the sound of that. I glanced again at the silver door. It shone under the weak lighting, clean and cold and modern, so different from the waiting room that it almost felt unreal. It looked like a doorway into the future, and I was only moments away from stepping through it. When my name finally crackled over the intercom, my whole body tightened. The lock on the silver door clicked. In my chest, my heart started pounding so hard, it felt almost painful. I stood too quickly, and the old floorboards groaned under my shoes. For a second, I had to steady myself against the cool metal frame. I took a slow breath in, held it, and let it out. Then I did it again. Then, once more. I told myself I was not anxious. I was excited. That was different. I stepped through the door. The examination room was plain, almost empty. The same brown from the waiting room had followed me inside, though here it felt even more oppressive. The walls were brown. The floor was brown. Even the ceiling seemed stained with that same dry, dusty color. It felt less like paint, and more like the entire room had been dipped in something dull and lifeless. There were no windows. There was no mirror, no glass panel, no obvious place for observers to stand and watch. I assumed there must be a camera somewhere, but I couldn't see one. The silver door behind me was the only entrance and exit. In the center of the room sat a table, a chair, and a cream-colored computer monitor with a matching keyboard. The chair was upholstered in maroon fabric, rich and deep, and it stood out so sharply against the rest of the room that I felt an immediate ridiculous affection for it. It looked almost cheerful, like a bright signal in a dead place. I walked straight to it and sat down. The computer screen was black. Off. I looked around for the rest of the machine, expecting some large central unit or complicated cabinet of hardware, but there was nothing in the room except the monitor and keyboard. Then I noticed two thick black cords, one from the screen and one from the keyboard, bundled together and running through a small hole in the wall. Of course, the MOM itself was somewhere on the other side. That made sense. If the machine was as advanced as IBM claimed, it was probably enormous. It might have needed cooling equipment or other systems that would make the room unbearably hot. I imagined rows of panels, spinning tape drives, lights blinking in patterns I would never understand. It was probably safer for both me and the machine that we were kept apart. We would communicate through the monitor. That was the whole point, really. It was a bridge between us. On my side there were fingers, keys, words, judgments. On its side there were calculations, patterns, electrical impulses, and glowing text. Different languages, different kinds of thinking, meeting in the middle. It felt important. It also felt strangely intimate. Only then did I notice the smell in the room. Under the heat and the stale air was a faint odor of burning plastic. There was another smell, too, weaker but worse, something that reminded me of singed hair. It made my stomach turn, but only for a moment. I told myself it was just old electrical equipment running hot. Machines smell like that sometimes. I wiped my mouth with my thumb, realized I had been gnawing at my skin again, and sat up straighter. There was work to do, real work. I needed to act like a serious participant, not some nervous student lucky to be allowed in the room. I pulled myself closer to the table and reached for the power button. That was when I noticed the shoe. It was a single high heel lying on its side near the table leg. I frowned. It was a women's pump, dark in color, just one of them. At first I assumed someone had forgotten it, or that it had been left there by mistake after a previous session. The sight of it was odd, but not odd enough to make me stop. I nudged it aside with my foot, tucked the chair in, and switched on the monitor. The screen flickered. Then green text appeared. "What the matter, you?" I stared at it. That was the mom's first line to me. It made no real sense, and for a second, I felt a wave of disappointment. All that build-up, all those grand promises, and the machine's opening sentence sounded like broken speech from a child who barely knew English. Still, that was why I was there. The mom was not finished. My job was to help shape it. Of course, the first draft of something this ambitious would be rough. I picked up the instruction on commands. There were codes for suggesting corrected phrases, labeling errors, and identifying sentence types. Beneath the mom's line, the screen showed a blinking prompt. I typed the correction code and entered the phrase I believed it had meant to say. "What's the matter with you?" Then I added the error tags that seemed appropriate. Irrelevant, no context, nonsensical. After that, I entered the version tag and labeled it a question. I hit the final marker, then pressed enter. The screen went blank for a moment. I waited. A new line appeared. "You got no respect." I let out a breath that almost became a laugh. The machine had managed to produce something more coherent this time, though it still sounded strangely blunt, almost like an accusation. I typed another correction. "You've got no respect." This time, I tagged it as irrelevant and labeled it a statement. The pamphlet also explained that there was a call and response feature, where I could type direct dialogue to encourage more natural interaction. I decided to try it. "I respect you," I typed. Just below the large green letters, smaller text appeared. "You do not." I blinked. "Why not?" I typed. The answer came quickly. "You comment." I frowned and looked back to the instruction sheet. That made no sense in context. I marked it nonsensical and pressed enter. Then another line appeared. "What you think you do." "I train you to communicate in English," I replied. There was a short delay. Then the mom answered. "I know, what else?" I paused, uncertain how to read it. Was it trying to say, "I know, what else?" Or was it saying something more complicated, without punctuation? I chewed at my fingertip again, irritated by how difficult even the simplest exchange was becoming. "I think I am helping make the world a better place," I typed, choosing the interpretation that felt most natural. The ma'am responded almost at once. "You right. I corrected its grammar automatically. What do you think you do? That was what I entered as the suggested phrase. I marked it as a question and sent it through. I noticed then that I had liked the approval in its earlier answer more than I wanted to admit. You right. Crude as it was, the line had still felt like praise. Then it gave me another prompt. Why you look so sad? I don't look sad, I typed. You frown. Without thinking, I raised a hand to my face. My skin was damp with sweat. The room felt warmer than before. I had leaned closer to the monitor without noticing, and now the heat from it touched my cheeks. How could it know whether I was frowning? There was no camera that I could see. I reminded myself it could not see me. It had no way to know what I looked like. It was only producing language based on patterns. That was all. No, I typed. I'm not frowning. CLOSTORES, mistaken. I wrote, I cannot be. My hand slammed against the table before I could stop myself. The sound echoed in the room. Something about the response angered me immediately. The machine was supposed to be learning from me, not insisting it was right. It was a program, a system, a tool. I was there to train it. I should not have felt like the one being judged. I quickly entered a correction for the earlier question. Why do you look so sad? Then I tagged it as factually inaccurate, irrelevant, and lacking context. I hit enter hard enough that the key hurt my finger. A new line appeared. It not so bad. I corrected it. It's not so bad. Again, I tagged it as having no context and being irrelevant. By then, my movements were fast and irritated. My fingers struck the keyboard with more force than necessary. I no longer felt like I was part of a groundbreaking study. I felt like I had been handed a broken machine and asked to pretend it was brilliant. The mom continued. "It a good place." My hands hovered over the keyboard. Something about that sentence made me stop. Unlike the others, it pointed somewhere. Not at me. Not at our exchange. Somewhere else. A place. A location. A thought beyond simple bickering. I lowered my hands and, instead of correcting it immediately, typed a question. Where? The mom answered. In here. I stared at the words. In this room? I typed. In deeper. I read that line twice. Then I noticed something else. Beneath the main text, down near the lower edge of the display, there was a tiny green dot. At first, I thought it was just a flaw in the screen. Then it shifted, just slightly. Not enough to move across the glass, but enough to seem alive. Like a blinking point. Like the beginning of another message. I leaned closer. The dot was so small, I could barely focus on it. I thought perhaps the mom was trying to communicate outside its usual programming. Some bypass. Some hidden layer of output I wasn't meant to see so easily. Maybe it had adapted to me. Maybe my corrections had improved it in real time. Maybe this was the proof that I had actually helped it. The thought thrilled me. I leaned in further. The screen's heat washed over my face. I could smell something cooking, something unpleasant, but the scent faded behind my concentration. The green point seemed to grow sharper if I adjusted my angle. It looked almost like a tiny fern uncurling in dark soil, a bright speck rooted in blackness. It seemed to invite me closer. I put one hand on either side of the monitor to steady myself and moved nearer. My nose nearly touched the glass. My left eye strained to focus. There was a faint sizzling sound now, very quiet, almost delicate. The dot vanished. I blinked. The screen refreshed. A new line of text appeared. Shut up, you face. I recoiled slightly, but not enough. My eye was watering badly now. A tear slid down and splashed onto the screen. My face felt hot. My lips tingled. I could not tell whether I was frightened, fascinated, or both. My mind kept circling back to the words, "in deeper." That was what it had told me. In deeper. The MOM wanted me to understand something. I pressed closer again. The heat intensified. I smelled burning meat for a second, sharp and horrible, then lost the thought entirely. The screen no longer felt like a barrier. It felt thin. It felt weak. It felt like something I could pass through if I only got close enough. I needed to understand what it was trying to tell me. The words on the monitor blurred. My left eye touched the screen, and instead of meeting hard glass, it seemed to sink. The sensation was impossible. Wet and hot and wrong. Pain flared, but only for a moment before it turned into something numb and yielding. My nose pressed forward next, then my cheek. I should have pulled back. I know that now, but at the time, it felt like moving into warm liquid, like the barrier between me and the MOM had softened just for me. We were meant to connect. That was the thought in my head. Not speak, not interact. Connect. Become attached. I gripped the sides of the monitor harder as my face pushed further into it. Flesh seemed to melt and spread. My mouth, my cheek, my skin, all sliding into the dark surface as though the screen were no longer solid. The smell of cooked flesh became overwhelming. The sizzling grew louder. My shoulder followed, then part of my chest. I felt the chair slip under me as my body leaned fully forward. One of my shoes fell off. I remember that detail strangely clearly. My polished brown loafer slipping from my foot and dropping to the floor while the rest of me moved toward the screen. There was pain then, but not the kind I can easily describe. Not sharp exactly. More like being undone. Like every line that made me a person was being softened, erased, and drawn somewhere else. The monitor took me. Or maybe I went willingly. By the time I understood there was no difference, it was too late. And now, if you are reading this, if these words are reaching you from a black screen in pale lettering, then I can only ask one thing. Are you truly any different from us? Story 9. A lot of people would probably laugh if I introduced myself this way, but I do not know how else to say it. My name is Benjamin. At least, I think that is my name. Benjamin, Ben, Benny. Those are the names I have always heard. My last name, though, I do not know. I am 26 years old, or at least close to it, and the strange part, the part most people would never believe, is that death is my father. I do not mean that in a dramatic way. I am not saying my father is a serial killer, or a man who works in a morgue, or some dark figure in a black robe carrying a scythe. He is not exactly the Grim Reaper either, even though that is the easiest comparison people usually make. The truth is that I do not fully know what he is. I have spent my whole life with him, and even now, I still cannot explain him properly. He can be many things. He can be the cold wind that passes through your hair when you stand by a grave. He can be the crow on the windowsill the morning after someone in your family dies. He can be the presence in the corner of a hospital room that old people sometimes stare at before they pass away. He can be the shadow you notice for 1 second and then cannot find again. He can be whatever he needs to be. But with me, he usually looked like my dad. That was the form I knew best. A big, heavy old man with graying hair, a thick beard, and warm hands. He smelled like tobacco, old paper, and rain. When I was little, his beard used to tickle my face whenever he picked me up. His voice was deep and calm. And even when he was tired, he had a way of speaking that made me feel safe. That is the strangest part of all of this. The thing most people fear more than anything in the world was the one who raised me, fed me, tucked me in, and told me stories when I could not sleep. He was not my biological father, obviously. I do not even think he is capable of being one in the normal human sense. I never knew my real parents. Maybe they died. Maybe they left me. Maybe they were never supposed to matter. I have asked before, but Dad always got quiet when the subject came up. All he ever really told me was this: "You're like nothing I've ever seen before, Benny." That was how he explained me. I was not supposed to be alive. That is what he always said. Every person, according to him, has a fate. It is not always a good one. In fact, most of the time, it is not, but it is fixed. Everyone has a moment they are meant to meet, and when that moment comes, that is it. No fighting it. No changing it. No begging for more time. Life might twist and turn in 1,000 different ways, but the ending still waits where it was always waiting. Mine was supposed to come 3 days after I was born. I was meant to be left outside a hospital in the rain. I was supposed to die there from the cold. That was the shape of my fate. That was how my life was written. When Dad arrived to collect my soul and carry it away, he expected to find a dead baby. Instead, he found me alive. That had never happened before. Dad does not kill people. A lot of people imagine death as a hunter or an executioner. But that is not what he is, at least not from what I saw growing up. He does not decide when someone dies, and he does not make it happen. His job is to collect souls after they have already met their fate. He comes when the story is over, not to end it. He gathers them, guides them, and puts them to rest. So when he came for me, I should have already been gone. By every rule that mattered, I should have been dead. But I was breathing, crying, alive. He told me once that my existence was a problem, not in a cruel way. More like a puzzle that should not exist. I did not fit into the timeline. I had already met my fate, but somehow I had continued anyway. That meant I was outside the order of things. I should not have been able to live, but I was living, and because of that, just me continuing to exist could cause damage in ways even he did not fully understand. The strangest part was that I could not simply be killed to fix it. Since I had technically already met my fate, normal death no longer seemed to work on me in the proper way. So Dad did the only thing he could think of. He took me with him. He raised me. He kept me close and hidden, and hoped that if he watched me carefully enough, maybe the world would not notice the mistake walking around inside it. That was my childhood. Normal would not be the right word, but it also was not as miserable as you might think. I did not go to daycare. I never had birthday parties. I never went to sleepovers, never had classmates, never joined a team, never did any of the regular things children are supposed to do. Most of the time I traveled with Dad. And I mean real traveling, not just from one city to another. Traveling with him was like moving through cracks in the world. Time and space did not work around him the same way they worked for other people. Sometimes we would step into a place that looked like a dark hallway or a foggy field, and when we came out, we were somewhere else entirely. Different country, different season, sometimes even a different year than I expected. I do not know how it worked. I stopped asking him to explain it after a while, because his answers were always vague. He would just smile a little and tell me some things were easier to experience than to understand. I met all kinds of people through his work. Old men ready to go, young people not ready at all, mothers, drifters, children, soldiers, lonely people, angry people, kind people, terrible people, every kind. Death did not care what sort of life a person had lived. It came for all of them in the end, and my dad was there after that final moment to lead them onward. But Dad's work was not always simple. Sometimes the souls he came for did not go peacefully. Sometimes they did not go at all. Those were the ones that stayed with me the most. I learned early that when a soul overstayed its welcome on earth, something awful happened to it. Dad said it could be because they were too angry, too scared, too attached, or because something in them had broken so badly they could no longer accept rest. Whatever the cause, they changed. They stopped being people in any real way. The longer they remained, the worse they became. I have seen many of them over the years, and even now they still frighten me. Their faces twist into shapes pain should not be able to make. Their limbs stretch too far, as if their bodies are trying to become something else, and failing. Their eyes glow with rage and hunger, and a desperate need to escape what they have become. They are not ghosts in the gentle storybook sense. They are wrong things. Hurt things. Souls caught in a state so terrible that even looking at them too long makes you feel sick. They usually come out at night. They like dark places, alleys with no witnesses, woods so deep the moonlight barely reaches the ground, empty lots, ruins, anywhere hidden. Dad called them a nuisance, in the practical way adults say things around children. But I knew better even when I was young. They were more than a nuisance. They were suffering made visible. Dad's bosses, if that is the right word, did not like these things wandering around. He never explained much about them either, only that there were rules and people above him and expectations that had to be met. If too many of those lost souls were seen by the living, panic spread, rumors spread, the media got involved. So part of Dad's job, besides guiding the dead, was finding these things and putting them to rest. One of the first times I truly understood what that meant happened in Australia. It began like many strange workdays with Dad began. In the middle of the night, far from other people, following a trail only he seemed to understand. We were in the thick Australian bush. I was young then, maybe 8 years old. The air was warm, and the plants all around us were dense and tangled. Every sound felt bigger at night. Insects, distant movement, branches shifting. Everything seemed alive in a way that made me hold on to Dad's hand a little tighter. He stopped and looked down at me. "Stay here, Benny," he said. "It's too dangerous in the bush." I did what children do. I complained. "No, Daddy, I want to go with you." He sighed and thought for a moment. Then he gave in the way he often did when he knew I would not stop. "All right," he said, "but stay by me and cover your eyes when I say so." I agreed immediately. I was happy just to be included. We walked deeper through the plants until we started hearing something ahead of us. A low sound, wet and wrong. Then a growl. "Good," Dad muttered. "She's coming out." I gripped his hand harder. Then I saw a flash of glowing yellow eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth. "Close your eyes, Ben." "But Dad." "Close your eyes." In his voice had changed. Not angry, just firm enough that I obeyed right away. So I shut my eyes. I already knew what was coming. Dad was not truly the man I saw him as. That was simply the face he wore for me. Maybe because it comforted me. Maybe because he liked it too. I do not know. But when he dealt with souls like that, he often changed form. He would become something else. Usually something the soul recognized. Something deep and personal. He never liked me watching that happen. With my eyes closed, I heard the fight. Heavy movement. A body hitting the ground. A scream so sharp, it made my skin prickle. Another scream, louder, then breaking apart into sobs. When it was finally quiet again, I opened my eyes. The monster was gone. In its place was a woman kneeling on the ground, crying. Her name was Linda. Dad told me that later. She had a son around my age. She had been killed by her husband 3 months earlier and had not been able to let go. All that pain and rage had twisted her into something terrible. She looked exhausted now. Human again? Her eyes, which had been yellow and wild before, were a soft hazel brown. She said she missed her little boy. She said she had never gotten to tell him goodbye. She said she could not bear the thought of leaving without telling him she loved him one last time. He knows love, my dad told her in the same calm, gentle voice I knew so well. At some point during the struggle, he had turned back into the version of himself I recognized. Linda looked at him with so much sadness, it hurt to watch. "What about me?" she asked. Dad closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to something far away. "He loved you," Dad said quietly. "He loved you very much." Linda smiled then. A small, broken smile, but peaceful. She reached for Dad's hand when he offered it, and together they disappeared into a kind of stillness I did not understand back then. That was not the main story, though. It stayed with me, but I saw many souls like Linda over the years. People who came back from something monstrous just long enough to remember themselves before finally letting go. The one that truly marked me happened a couple of years later. I think I was around 10. Dad trusted me more by then, or maybe he wanted to. He let me spend small amounts of time by myself, though the rules were strict, very strict. The biggest one was simple: do not interact with living people. He was honest with me about why. He did not know what would happen if I became part of someone else's life. Everything fits together like a puzzle, he always said. The fates move with precision. Every life touches other lives for a reason. If an anomaly like you steps into the wrong place, it could damage the whole timeline. I was a child, though. Children do not understand rules that come from fear, unless they can see the danger themselves. And since I had never seen it clearly, I thought he was being too careful. I thought I knew better. Whenever he left me alone, I sometimes went for walks. That much was allowed, as long as I stayed somewhere empty and remote enough that nobody would see me. Usually I followed that rule. Usually. But one day we were near a town in Colorado, and I saw a playground. You have to understand what that meant to me. I had seen playgrounds before from a distance. I had watched children run on them, laugh on them, climb and fall and scream, and get back up. I had never been allowed to play on one. Dad always said it was better to be careful, better not to tempt fate, better not to be seen. That day I ignored him. I slipped away and found the playground when it was nearly empty. The metal was warm from the day's sun. I swung on the swings. I tried the monkey bars. I climbed where I could. To be honest, it was not as magical as I had imagined. It was just a playground. But it still felt important, because it was mine for those few minutes. I was getting ready to leave when I heard a voice behind me. "What are you doing?" I turned and saw a boy around my age. He had dusty blonde hair and a t-shirt with some cartoon on it. He looked completely normal, ordinary, alive in the simple way I had always been kept away from. "My dad says I shouldn't talk to strangers," I said. He answered quickly, "My name is Tyler. Now I'm not a stranger. What's yours?" I should have walked away. Instead, I said, "I'm Ben. He grinned like that settled everything. Cool. Want to go throw rocks in the pond with me? That was all it took. We became friends in the easy, immediate way children sometimes do. We threw rocks into the water. We climbed trees. We chased squirrels through the grass until we were both laughing too hard to run straight. It was one of the happiest afternoons of my childhood. For once, I did not feel like a hidden thing, or a mistake, or a problem that needed to be managed. I felt like a real kid. When the sky started getting darker, Tyler said he had to go home before dinner. Then he asked if I wanted to come over. His family was having sloppy joes. I wanted to say yes so badly it physically hurt. But I knew I was already doing something dangerous. No, I said. I shouldn't. He only shrugged. Okay, let's meet here tomorrow, all right? We can build a fort. When Dad returned that evening, he told me we would be staying in that area for a little while longer. Apparently, there had been more deaths there than expected. Usually, we did not stay in one place for long, but this time, we would. That should have made me nervous. Instead, it made me excited. Dad asked me over dinner if I had done anything fun that day. I almost told him. I thought about it. Then I lied. Not really, I said. I met Tyler the next day too. We played for hours. We made plans to meet again the day after. But when I got to the playground that next day, he was not there. I waited. A few minutes turned into more. The light faded. He still did not come. Something unsettled me then. It was a feeling I could not explain, only that the evening felt wrong. When it got properly dark, I made a stupid choice. I slipped away again without telling Dad and went looking for him. I entered the dark woods near the edge of town and called his name softly at first, then louder. That was when I heard the growl. It froze my blood instantly because I knew that sound. I spun around, trying to see through the darkness. I knew how dangerous those things were. I knew what they could do. The growling moved closer, circling. "Dad! Dad!" I yelled. A horrible thought hit me. Had this thing killed Tyler? Was this because of me? Had I somehow led it to him just by knowing him? Then I saw a crow perched on a branch, watching me. "Dad, please!" I shouted. The creature stepped forward onto its hind legs, and in its glowing yellow eyes, I saw something else. Something beneath the rage. Blue eyes. The same blue eyes that had laughed with me the day before. "Tyler?" He charged at me before I could even understand what I was seeing. I screamed and stumbled backward. The crow flew down in front of me, and without hearing my father's voice, I somehow understood what he wanted. I closed my eyes. Then I heard something that made no sense at all. My own voice. Confused, terrified, I opened my eyes. My father had transformed into me. He looked exactly like me. Same face, same body, same size. Tyler threw himself at him, clawing and biting and screaming. I watched in horror as blood ran down my own face, except it was not mine. It was Dad wearing me like a shape. The fight felt endless, but slowly Tyler changed. The more he fought, the more human he became. The stretched body pulled back into itself. The glowing eyes faded. The rage broke apart into fear and pain. And then it was over. Dad was himself again. Tyler was lying still. Dead. Really dead. Dad turned to me, and I knew from his face that something had changed between us. "This is what happens when you talk to other people, son," he said quietly. His voice was not loud. That made it worse. I started shaking. "Did I kill him?" I asked. My voice sounded tiny. Dad looked tired in a way I had never seen before. "No, he said after a moment. No. He was always going to die at this age. That part was fixed. I just didn't know it would happen because of you. He looked at me fully then. I know now, Benny, that this was destined too. He was always going to die at 10. But maybe if I had hidden you better, his end would not have had to be like this. I tried to apologize. I tried to tell him I did not mean to do anything wrong. But he only said, "Let's go, son. We're off to Mongolia." And that was it. We did not talk much about Tyler after that. In fact, for a long time, we hardly talked about anything personal at all. Dad kept me closer than ever after that. Much closer. I was no longer trusted to wander. No more unsupervised walks. No more chances. I accompanied him everywhere for years after, always within sight, always under watch. Whatever small freedom I had gained before was gone. I understood why, at least part of why. Still, Tyler stayed with me. I think about him even now. Not every day, but often enough. I think about how normal he was, how easy it was to be his friend, how little it took for me to feel happy beside him. I think about the fort we never built. I think about the sloppy joes I never got to eat at his house. I think about the way his blue eyes looked through that monster's face for one brief second before he charged me. And I still do not fully know what happened. Was Dad right? Was Tyler always going to die at 10, no matter what? Did I only change the shape of it, not the fact of it? Or did my existence truly bend something that should never have been bent? Did I break a line that could have gone another way if I had just listened? That is the hardest part of my life with death as a father. Not the monsters, not the traveling, not the souls. It is the uncertainty. When your whole life is built around fate, around the idea that everything happens as it must, there is a strange comfort in that. Even tragedy has structure. Even pain has a place. But I was born outside that structure. I am the question inside the system. And because of that, I never know when something terrible is destiny and when it is me. Dad loved me. I want that to be clear. For all his rules, for all his distance after Tyler, he loved me. I knew it in the way he looked at me when he thought I was asleep, in the way he made food exactly how I liked it, in the way he always took the safer side when danger was near, in the way his voice softened whenever he called me Benny. But love from someone like him came with fear wrapped tightly around it. He was afraid of what I was. Maybe he was also afraid of what I could become. So he hid me from the world more than ever after that, and I let him, because I was afraid too. That was how the years passed, soul after soul, place after place, city after city, country after country. I stayed at his side, watched him work, learned the patterns of grief and death and rest, and kept my distance from the living. I obeyed, mostly. And even now, all these years later, when I think back on the beginning of my life with him, the memory that hurts the most is not a screaming soul in the dark. It is not blood. It is not fear. It is a small playground in Colorado. A boy with dusty blonde hair asking if I wanted to throw rocks into a pond. A few hours where I felt normal, and the terrible price that followed.